Erased Destiny. Prologue, a white page. In a small cottage, in an even smaller village, in the midst of fields and forests, a fair-haired girl was born, the fruit of the love between seamstress Abella and smallholder peasant Ryglan, the reason why they married and started living together, the reason why the seamstress gave up her job, left Sintra, and tried to find her place in husband's house in Wolfsrome. Seeing the girl's bright, almost white hair, her father named her Merigold, after the yellow flowers popular in the area. Merigold did not stop crying. It was stuffy in the house. The sun was drying the residual moisture from the rain-thirsty vegetables, and the dust from the nearby road dirtied the yard. Abella, though exhausted from childbirth, walked around the house with little Merigold in her arms, so that at least for a while the girl would sleep. The old house, formerly owned by Ryglan's parents, was larger than the tenement in which Abella had lived in her youth. Dark, gloomy, with low-placed windows, was almost obscured by the flowers growing nearby. Abella sat down on the dried grass, leaned her back against the wooden wall, from which the long-established white paint was falling off in patches, and stared at the slightly twitching leaves of the trees. The steady clatter of the hammer and the sound of the wood being cut made it difficult for the young mother to fall into a pre-dawn nap, but fortunately did not disturb Merigold, who was sleeping on her lap. The girl's light hair stuck to her forehead, and her white tunic curled up to reveal plump legs. Ryglan walked around the yard looking for pieces of wood suitable for building a cradle, and each time he found something unsuitable, he cursed under his breath. Abella hadn't been bothered by this before, but after Merigold's birth, she became concerned that the girl would pick up bad habits. Abella would have preferred to stay with their daughter in Sintra, to continue sewing men's shirts or children's nightgowns, but that was something Ryglan didn't even want to hear about. He couldn't imagine living anywhere else, paying strangers for a small room in a noisy, crowded city. Abella braided her reddish-blonde hair and interspersed it with flowers dried from the excess sun. She tried to find as many good things as possible about living in the countryside, with meager results, so for the time being she focused on the lack of mud smashed by carriage wheels and the lack of stench coming from the gutters. She smiled at the leaves rustling above her head. Trees were rare in Sintra. They only grew near the library, the town hall, and the mayor's house. It was as if every bit of walled land had to be landscaped. Shortly after their marriage, before Merigold's birth, Ryglan announced that his parents had moved out to live with his elder sister, whom Abella had never met. To Abella's surprise, this sister did not show up to pick up the elders, and Ryglan refused to tell his wife anything more about the sudden change of living place of his parents. Abella was grateful to her in-laws for giving the newlyweds the entire house, together with all the equipment and even the bedding. She wanted to thank them, maybe help them, but the last time she saw them was during the ceremony. Abella sighed. Her parents disappeared from her life as well. Opposing this acquaintance, from the very beginning, Abella's parents left Sintra 2 hours after the wedding. They sold their estate to never, ever see their disobedient pregnant daughter. They even left her a letter asking her not to visit them under any circumstances. Ryglan's parents were much more positive about their future daughter-in-law, making Abella all the more surprised by their sudden departure. A few minutes after Merigold, Jargon was born. He waved his hands in search of his beloved, who was not his mother. The third child of the richest merchant in the area was handed over to a midwife who washed it and tried to bottle feed it. Teenage Gabriel and 1 year younger, Malika, watched their little brother with curiosity masking their lack of understanding. They struggled to find a reason why people in their 40s decided to have another offspring. After handing out the feeding schedule, the walking schedule, and a few other schedules such as consultations with the local witch doctor, visits of relatives wanting to see the boy, Joanna boarded the carriage. Cyril had already packed their trunks and made arrangements to spend the first month of Jargon's life with Mayor Uriel for their own convenience. Uriel, a family friend with a daughter at Malika's age, often hosted Joanna and Cyril's children. To avoid sleepless nights, days full of crying and clothes soiled by an infant, they planned to spend 50 days away from home, and if, on their return, it turned out that Jargon was still teasing to temporarily rent a flat in Sintra, Joanna offered to move in with her parents, but this was never agreed to by Cyril. When Gabriel was born, the renovation of the purchased mansion put a severe strain on the household budget, and they could not afford such comforts. To earn money, Cyril had to travel, something Joanna forbade him to do. It is hard to blame a 19-year-old girl for panicking at the sight of a newborn baby and not wanting to be left alone with the child. Joanna's parents categorically refused to look after their grandchild until he was of educational age. Cyril's parents had died before he reached the age of 10. Therefore, the happy parents were left with the problem alone. Things were a little easier with Malika. She cried less and ate more willingly. Unfortunately, she started to get sick early and never quite recovered from her colds. Blaming Cyril and inadequate housing conditions, the grandparents agreed to take Malika under their roof, together with Joanna, of course. Cyril stayed with 3-year-old Gabriel in an empty, not quite renovated house, and recalled it as one of the best times of his life. They were able to run around the house with buckets to keep the rainwater from soaking the floors, without regard for customary norms. They could eat outside, sleep on hay, and catch fish. They could play cards with the servants, look out for stars at night, and sleep until noon during the day. Nobody forced them to put on slippers. Nobody checked what clothes they were wearing or whether they were clean enough. They sometimes spent the hot days in the forest and the nights in a hut in the backyard. Against Joanna's prohibitions, Cyril would sat Gabriel in front of him on horseback, and they would ride off to run important errands. He suspected that it was these horseback escapades that made Gabriel love spending time in the saddle, but he never told his wife about this. He preferred to tell tales of his youthful travels, his dangerous adventures, and the work he did. Delighted in adventurous tales, Gabriel listened to no one as much as his father. Despite his young age, Gabriel won all the local races and happened to venture out so far that he would return home a few days after leaving. According to Joanna, it was her son's reckless behavior that dyed her hair gray, and Malika's illnesses that plowed her face with wrinkles. Younger than her husband, Joanna looked like his mother on her worst days. The black-haired Cyril successfully resisted the passing years, according to his own theory, thanks to good drinks and spending time outdoors. Malika liked city life for a change. She befriended Uriel's daughter Cecilia, who in turn loved spending time in Gabriel's company. The 3 teenagers became inseparable, and although Cecilia was promised to the owner of the surrounding mines, Joanna began to seek her hand in marriage to Gabriel. With their wealth, they could rival anyone in the region. Gabriel lacked nothing but years, and Cecilia seemed interested in the relationship. Joanna and Cyril's plans were destroyed by the sudden death of Gabriel, who had not returned from one of his expeditions. The scouts' findings indicated that the boy had been murdered by bandits, adding to the parents' grief. After her brother's death, Malika fell ill and succumbed to a mysterious illness, the cause of which no one has found. 2 funerals in 1 month left a mark on the psyche of Jargon's parents and removed all non-black clothing from their wardrobe. 2-year-old Jargon became an only child, the last hope for grandchildren of his quite old parents. In appearance similar to his father, an extremely crying Jargon was afraid of everything around him. He was afraid to leave his cradle, afraid to leave his room, afraid to be left alone, even for a moment. The loss of his siblings and separation from his bereaved mother left Jargon at the mercy of the servants. Had it not been for Cyril's personal involvement, the little boy would have become dehydrated, and instead of 2, they would have had to prepare 3 funeral pyres. Only the father did not lose touch with reality during the difficult moments and kept their last child safely in his office. Although the child's incessant crying prevented him from working or even resting, Cyril suffered in silence, unlike his wife, pouring out her grievances to the entire neighborhood. At the same time, Abella gave birth to Rose, her second daughter. Because of close distance between 2 houses, sometimes guests got the address wrong and rushed in with flowers to Joanna or ashes to Abella. The mistakes definitely angered Joanna more, as if the black ribbons tied around the pillars and on all the trees leading up to their property weren't enough. Drunken villagers would burst into the house, where the servants had been forbidden to speak other than in whispers, and at full throat congratulate the second daughter on her supposed parents. In the end, Joanna lined up footmen outside the entrance to the house, whose job was to make sure the guests got to the right address. Although the funeral rites lasted longer than the celebration of Rose's birth, they still ended far too soon. Many months passed before Joanna recovered from the loss of her 2 children, and Cyril smiled at Jargon. Raised in a suddenly empty and quiet house, the boy was unable to find his way among cheerful peers. Pale from spending time at home, obese from lack of exercise, taciturn Jargon aroused resentment from the other children. In order not to expose himself to unpleasant remarks and repulsion, he did not visit anyone. To the forest his parents forbade him to go. For little Jargon, the yard was the whole world. Busy with Rose and the work in the fields, parents were not attentive enough to their elder daughter, who got into trouble again and again. Fortunately, despite her many adventures, Merigold grew up healthy. She soon began to talk, which led to countless questions. Why don't the flowers have eyes? Why is the lady so old? Why is it night after day?